Barcelona has always been an interesting football club. More than once they've been considered the greatest club on the planet without much question. They've boasted teams so good that they make you think they're unstoppable. But they've also boasted leadership and management that somehow always finds a way to make you question how a club this big can have so many problems while remaining competitive. They've been able to crank out world-class talent at an extreme rate, which has contributed tremendously to their success. We're seeing them continue to do the same right now. Lamine Yamal, Gavi, Pedri, Pau Cubarsí, Fermín López, Marc Bernal, just to name a few that we'll be talking about for the next decade at least. Although a pessimistic way of looking at this incredible feat is that this ability to produce talent has greatly masked their incompetency in other areas. Barcelona being in trouble on a financial level, on an institutional level, over the past 100 years or so, it's happened a lot more frequently than you may think. And yet, somehow, they've always found a way to make it work. What interests me about Barcelona over the last 20 years or so is their decision making has pretty much come down to three men, all of whom have concurrently sat on the board and seemingly played musical chairs: Joan Laporta, Josep Bartomeu, Sandro Rosell. These are the people that sign attackers who many believe they don't need for 55 million euros, for example, knowing that they won't be able to register him under normal conditions, needing to rely on funny clauses that allow you to replace already injured players. The people that sign players on contracts that they cannot afford, only to go out and vilify those players later on when they can't fulfill said contract that they signed the players on for. The people that are allegedly involved in paying off referees. The people that pull more levers than we knew existed. The same people that form groups that lead mutinies against current and previous leadership. Joan Laporta was at the head when this happened in the late 90s, and from the looks of things, history could be coming full circle. We have Real Madrid, that is probably the premium model of how to run a football club. We have Manchester United, who may not be the best example of sporting success, but who are definitely a shining beacon of economic prowess. And then we have Barcelona, who despite being so internationally prestigious, are seemingly never consistent on either front. Will their new 1.5 billion euro Camp Nou provide them with the financial success that they hope it will? Following on from Real Madrid's record-breaking earnings bolstered by the opening of their new Santiago Bernabeu, there is reason to be optimistic. The business of Barcelona presents an interesting case. Hello everyone, truly hope you're all doing well. I'm Tinashe, welcome back. In this video, I want to focus on the historical business and leadership of the club and detail the main characters and presidents that influenced it the most without even stepping foot on the pitch. If you like this kind of video, I made a similar one on Real Madrid and Florentino Perez a couple months back. This would have come out sooner, but these take a while to make. Now, Barcelona, unlike most clubs of its size, have been marred by politics and complications. To understand how deep this goes and why it's important to know, we'll have to go back to the 1930s. 27 La Liga trophies, 31 Copa del Reys, 14 Spanish Super Cups and 5 Champions Leagues and counting. Barcelona is a historical juggernaut, but you could argue that their identity is of significantly more value than any trophy. They are more than a club. This motto has been especially important to the people of Barcelona because the club throughout its history has been a symbol of Catalan nationalism, particularly during General Franco's dictatorship, where it served as a rallying point for regional identity and democratic values. After early success in the 1900s, Barcelona's major problems began during the Spanish Civil War in 1936. As a symbol of the Catalan identity, the club resisted the Franco regime, which led to them facing significant consequences under Franco's rule. In 1936, Barca president Josep was murdered by Franco's soldiers. In 1938, the bombing of Barcelona occurred by Benito Mussolini, and one of his bombs was dropped on the club building. In 1940, their chair was replaced by Franco-devoted officials, and their badge and name, Football Club Barcelona, was changed to the Spanish Club de Futbol Barcelona to be more Spanish-sounding and remove the Catalonian flag. There was tragedy, but in human history, Sports has always acted as a galvanizing force during times of hardship. The football went on. Fast forward to the 50s and Barca entered a period of success. 5 Copa del Reys and 4 leagues during that period. Naturally, the club's fan base and members kept rising. It went from an all-time low of around 3,500 members during the Spanish Civil War era to around 30,000 in the 50s. This growing popularity demanded a new stadium to be built to fit all of these fans, and in 57, Camp Nou opened with a capacity of 90,000 people. This opening, however, brought a significant problem, a period of debt, the first of many. Construction costs for the stadium came to 288 million pesetas, which was around 4 times higher than the expected cost. The 60s brought in a barren patch of footballing success which did nothing to help the debt levels. Real Madrid becoming the European royalty they did not help. It seemed as though there was light at the end of the tunnel though. Why? Johan Cruyff signed for a world record-breaking $2 million in 1973. He had won 3 straight Champions Leagues with Ajax leading up to his arrival in Barcelona, and he kept the momentum going, winning La Liga in 74. Sadly, this was short-lived, and trophies didn't come pouring in as expected. The failures on the field and disagreements with how the club was being run in terms of its contract negotiations and recruitment led Cruyff to believe Barca wasn't in the best hands. He left in 78. But as one chapter closed, another opened. 1975 brought the death of Francisco Franco, and along with it, marked a new beginning for Spain. This period, known as the Spanish Transition, saw the restoration of democratic institutions and decentralization of power, which allowed for greater regional autonomy. Fancy words. I know, I own a dictionary. What did this mean for Barcelona? Well, they were finally, after waiting for so long, allowed to become a democratically run institution. In 1978, the first open elections were held. The main themes of this campaign were improving the club's financial state, improving their sporting performance, and decreasing political interference. These were the most important goals that people voting were looking for in a new president. Now, this is where the real story of this video starts, because one could argue that they have never fully achieved any of these goals. The election ended up being extremely close. Josep Luis Núñez emerged as the ultimate winner with 10,352 votes, was 9,527 from his nearest adversary. Very tight. Interestingly, he had no prior connection to the club. He was not a prior board member and was seen as a political outsider. To some, this, along with his successful career in real estate, was seen as the right combination of experience to oversee the business aspects of the club. One of Núñez's primary concerns was expanding the club's infrastructure and global reach. This approach sometimes clashed with the expectations of fans who saw the club's Catalan identity as paramount, so you can already see the disconnect here, right? Camp Nou was extended, a reserve and youth team stadium was built, but arguably, the most important event that took place during Núñez's tenure was the conversion of the club's old social headquarters into a dormitory for youth players not local to Barcelona in 1979, La Masia. It wasn't easy at the start. Despite it being one of his main campaign goals, the team did not win much on a domestic level until very well into the later parts of the 80s. There were a couple of Cup Winners' Cup wins, which was a highly respected competition, but the Champions League continued to elude them. Over and above all of that, one of the biggest problems that remained prevalent through his tenure was his leadership style. Núñez was described as a control freak. He was deeply involved in every aspect of the club and did not want anything to happen without him giving the order or the green light. Now, while this was a positive at times in helping to organize Barcelona, it led to friction with coaches and players. This tight leash on the club, especially on the financial side, led to them being very strict over contracts, contributing to the departures of key figures and superstars such as Diego Maradona, Johan Cruyff before that, R9 and Luis Figo after. In the 80s, Barca, like many football clubs, were heavily reliant on matchday revenues, particularly ticket sales, as their main primary source of income. Broadcasting rights and merchandising, which dominate football today, were not fully developed. This reliance on a single income stream made the club vulnerable to fluctuations in attendance and more. Knowing this, it was important to buy the right players and not splurge on anything. But Núñez was ambitious. He wanted the Champions League. Understandably, despite pinching pennies at times, he knew he had to spend money here and there, but he made his fair share of bad signings and investments, and also find it difficult to stabilize the wage bill, all while revenue remained up and down. He did have some tricks up his sleeve. In 1987, Núñez created a new business model that allowed the club to pay fewer taxes on the player wages. Under this new policy, the club was able to transfer half of the player wages into an image rights contract, which were significantly less taxed. This model was highly beneficial for the club and footballers as they would receive a higher portion of their wage. Everyone was happy, until the Spanish authorities got involved and started investigating. I hate when that happens. They concluded that this was not in compliance with La Liga's regulations, making the club switch back. The players asked for Núñez to make up the difference that they lost before returning to the old model. Instead, he laughed in their faces and said, "No bueno." On top of that, he demanded the players that they already paid with that model to return the extra money that they got from it. No one was happy anymore. The tensions between Núñez and everyone else involved with the club had been building up for around a decade at this point, and after yet another year of failure in 87-88, many had had enough. 6th place in La Liga, with 4 games to go in that season, and they were already 23 points down. So, on April 28th of 1988, a majority of the first team and the manager at the time, Lluís, a Euro-winning manager from 2008, held a mutiny in the Hesperia Hotel to discuss the role of Núñez and the terrible management of these player contracts. In this mutiny, the players accused Núñez of undermining the club's historical values. They demanded better wages, more respect, and his resignation letter. You would think this would be enough to get him the boot. It was not. A lot of fans sided with Núñez and blamed the players. The coach was sacked, and several first-team players were allowed to terminate their contracts. Núñez had won the battle, but even he realized that change was definitely needed. Enter Johan Cruyff for part 2. Ironically, a man that left the club as a player, largely due to Núñez's policies, was now back to save the day as a manager. Cruyff laid the foundation for a long-term project at Barcelona. Youth development, tactical innovation, and a unified playing philosophy across all levels of the club. This resonated with Núñez's ambition to establish Barcelona as a global football powerhouse. Cruyff felt a strong political connection and love with Barcelona and the Catalonian identity. He even named his son Jordi, a traditional Catalonian name. It was exactly what the club needed. His philosophy of promoting homegrown talent and ensuring that all teams played the same style of football created a pipeline of players who would go on to define Barcelona's success for decades to come. He quickly set about building what would become known as the Dream Team. Young talents like Pep Guardiola were incorporated with experienced stars like Hristo Stoichkov, Ronald Koeman, and Mikel Laudrup, players who fit his vision. When Cruyff was done with his rebuild, this team was indistinguishable from the team that held the mutiny only a couple years prior, and 3 years after his appointment in 1991, Barcelona returned to their place as champions of La Liga, and they won it 3 more times in a row. Núñez's biggest goal and dream for Barcelona was finally complete. In 1992, Barcelona won the Champions League and the league in the same year, and this event was significant. It had a huge impact on Barcelona's financial and commercial standings. It elevated the club's brand on the global stage, finally helping them stabilize the club's finances, attracting sponsorships, increasing merchandising sales, and enhancing its appeal to international fans. Barcelona positioned itself as one of the premier footballing clubs in the world. The model Cruyff instilled of growth from within was the foundation upon which Barcelona built its future successes. It has kept Barcelona competitive at the highest levels of football for decades, even when they continually put themselves into financial holes. All the same, it seems him and Núñez never truly found common ground. His departure in '96 reflected that. Núñez's authoritarian style butted heads with a lot of Cruyff's visions and wants. The fact that he had become so popular and ultimately powerful among the fans and players wasn't taken too well by Núñez either. Cruyff wanted new players to come in that could play his style. Núñez seldom agreed to spend the money. This, paired with Barcelona going on a couple of years without winning trophies and a loss to AC Milan in the 1994 Champions League final, led to Núñez sacking Cruyff in May of '96. Fans were appalled. This was the beginning of the end. But it was a long time coming. Back in 1986, 10 years prior, the Blaugrana Manifesto was published. This was a document written by a group of influential club members, intellectuals, and former players. It was a direct response to Núñez's policies and called for a return to the club's traditional values, emphasizing Catalan identity, democratic governance, and the need for greater transparency and member involvement in the club's decision-making. It argued that the club was losing its soul, becoming too focused on commercial success at the expense of its cultural and social responsibilities. We are nowhere near finished with this video, and you can already see why the business of this club is so intricate and detailed and complicated. The manifesto laid the groundwork and foundation for a new party to emerge, L'Elefant Blau, an opposition platform led by Joan Laporta, a lawyer and passionate Barcelona supporter, which looked to challenge Núñez's leadership. L'Elefant Blau echoed many of the criticisms outlined in the Blaugrana Manifesto. They were particularly critical of Núñez's decision to dismiss Johan Cruyff, which they saw as a betrayal of the club's footballing philosophy and a move that alienated many fans. In 1998, L'Elefant Blau organized a vote of no confidence against Núñez. Although they did not succeed in unseating him, Núñez narrowly survived the vote, but the writing was certainly on the wall. There were deep divisions within the club. After this vote of no confidence, Núñez finished off the 90s as president, winning a couple more La Liga titles before officially stepping down in 2000. Josep Luis Núñez was president for 22 years, the longest tenure in the club's history so far. He was controversial as can be and probably still has his fair share of enemies. However, nobody can deny his impact, or at the very least, the impact that was had on the club's sporting and financial profile under his presidency. Barcelona became a global player under his rule, but one might still wonder if he maybe could have taken them further with better policies. Núñez's vice president, Joan Gaspart, succeeded him after winning the election in 2000. However, this decision was likened to the Hydra. Cut off one head, another one takes his place. Gaspart had been a key figure during Núñez's entire 22-year presidency, and his election was initially seen as a continuation of Núñez's policies in a sense. Gaspart had high ambitions for the club and wanted to bring them back to winning ways. They had money now, so he proceeded to do the opposite of what Núñez did and pursued high-profile signings. Marc Overmars and Emmanuel Petit from Arsenal, Saviola, Giovanni, Juan Riquelme. This did not produce the intended results. Barcelona failed to win any major titles and the team's performances deteriorated. Surprise, surprise, Gaspar's actions put Barcelona back into a significant hole of debt. The club became extremely toxic on and off the pitch. Barcelona's best player, and the best player on the planet at the time, Luis Figo, left for Real Madrid in the summer of 2000. Figo had been a fan favorite at Barcelona, known for his skill, creativity, and commitment on the pitch. His decision to leave to go to Madrid, facilitated by the payment of his release clause, is still seen as the ultimate betrayal. And pretty soon the world was about to find out just how some people felt about that betrayal. Real Madrid and Figo came to town for El Clasico in 2002, and there was a surprise waiting for them. The Boixos Noios are a Barcelona Ultras group whose name directly translates to the Crazy Boys, and who Gaspart and Núñez seem to quietly endorse by doing nothing about them. They were amongst the most vocal and aggressive fans at the Camp Nou during this game. Now, these guys weren't your typical Ultras group. Initially, this was a small fan club dedicated to supporting Barcelona and promoting Catalan independence. Through the 80s, they soon began to adopt extreme right-wing, neo-fascist ideologies. Violent behavior, which included extortion, drug trafficking, and even murder, have been associated with this group. Their intense hatred for Luis Figo for leaving for Real Madrid led them to throw objects such as bottles, coins, and even knives on the pitch. But the craziest of all of them was one of the Ultras throwing a severed pig's head at Figo. This scene tainted the club's brand and reputation heavily. Gaspart then decided to bring Louis van Gaal back for a second stint. Terrible decision. Van Gaal's first stint was successful in winning and introducing players like Chipako Xavi and Puyol to the team, but he rarely saw eye to eye with the majority of the players. His personality and style was a major reason for stars wanting to leave. History repeated itself. His second stint was a lot worse, and only heightened the toxicity levels of the already extremely toxic environment Barcelona had around it. The team struggled in La Liga, finding themselves in the lower half of the table for much of the season. Players were unhappy with their roles under this management. The fan discontent grew as the team's performances failed to improve. Many protests by the fans took place, and the continued poor results led to Van Gaal being sacked in January of 2003. Shortly after that, acknowledging that the club's crisis was too deep for him to resolve, Joan Gaspart stepped down. Gaspart's tenure may have been the worst in the club's history post-independence. The toxicity, the mismanagement, the lack of silverware. By 2003, Barcelona's wage bill was consuming over 80% of its income, leaving little room to maneuver in other areas of the club's operations. Nobody knew what was going on anymore. It was chaos. Soon after the resignation of Gaspart came a new election and a new face, one that would ultimately change the entire landscape of the club. Joan Laporta, member 13,352, won the 2003 elections, ushering in a fresh start for the club. He brought a lot of hope to the fans and people at the club because he was increasingly involved in Catalan politics during the 90s. However, he was seen as savvy enough to not let this consume the running of the club and have the problems from the past resurface. A highly educated, successful lawyer born and bred in Barcelona. Coming into office, Laporta had too much to deal with. He inherited one of the most toxic atmospheres in all of sports history. A financially unstable, mismanaged, and underperforming team. One of his first steps to reform Barcelona was to cut the club's ties with Núñez, banning them from Camp Nou, something Núñez and Gaspart never really came close to doing. Going back to the presidential elections for a second, Laporta included an interesting part in his manifesto. He wanted to sign David Beckham and went in front of the press and announced that a price for Beckham had been agreed upon with Manchester United, that he would come to Barca if Laporta was elected. This was strange because it was public knowledge that Beckham was already in heavy talks with Real Madrid and looked like he was on the way there. The even stranger part about this is the fact that Florentino Perez didn't say anything. Perez could have easily shut down these rumors, but decided to stay silent. And on a further note to that, this was kind of a tactic that we've seen before. A couple years prior, when Florentino Perez was campaigning to become president of Real Madrid, he basically ran his campaign, or a large part of it at least, on the fact that he would sign Luis Figo, who, as you remember, was a Barcelona player. Perhaps Laporta was trying to strike a similar nerve. Regardless, it didn't work out, because after he was elected, Beckham to Madrid was announced pretty soon after. And you can say that Laporta was sat there with egg on his face, and you know what, maybe he was behind closed doors. But at the end of the day, what he did after that was sign a player that I think many would agree was a much better fit for Barcelona. He signed one of the most magical players in history, Ronaldinho. But before we get into that, we have to acknowledge that Laporta had much bigger issues to worry about than missing out on David Beckham. Money. When he took over, they were in substantial debt. Gaspart really did a number on them. Plus, their income streams definitely did not reflect the size of club that they were. In 2003, it was reported that their revenues were 123.4 million euros, which was less than half of Manchester United, for example. The club's operating loss was 72 million. A number of years of ongoing losses had left the club 186 million euros in debt. The threat of something bad happening to the club if that went on was a lot higher than you may think. Laporta's primary focus was to stabilize the club's finances. He immediately set out to reduce the wage bill, renegotiated player contracts, sold higher-earning but underperforming players, and focused on bringing in talent that fit within a sustainable wage structure. He understood the need to increase the club's revenue streams. He professionalized the club's management, turning it into a more commercially savvy organization. Both commercial and matchday revenue saw an incline, but the most impressive thing that Laporta did was focus on strategic signings that helped the club on the pitch. Laporta needed the right manager, so he hired Frank Rijkaard with Cruyff's approval. This was a perfect appointment to help lead the club forward on the pitch. Under Rijkaard, and with Ronaldinho leading the charge, Barcelona began to reclaim its status as one of Europe's top clubs. The fact that the 2003-04 season ended with Barcelona taking second place in La Liga just a year after being dangerously close to the relegation zone was already a giant step forward. All Rijkaard needed was time to work with his players, and thanks to Laporta's strong support, he was allowed to do it. The beginning of the 2004-05 season saw two major newcomers join Barcelona, Deco and Samuel Eto'o. La Masia shined through too, Xavi, Iniesta, and as of 2004, Lionel Messi. Also by 04-05, Xavi Hernandez was the only player linking the squad lists of 1998-99 and 2004-05. This revival led Barcelona to reclaim their crown as La Liga champions in both the 04-05 and 05-06 season. Because of this good run only 3 years into his tenure, many saw Laporta as a good combination of all the positive attributes of his predecessors, extremely ambitious but also quite pragmatic, an understanding of the need for balance. However, like those before him, his fortunes quickly began to unravel. He successfully increased the club's revenue and managed to reduce the immediate debt, yes, but it was the long-term vision that was under question. Heavy borrowing for short-term income boosts and using debt to finance transfers and other expenses was seen as risky, particularly given the club's past. Barcelona were successful under him in the first 5 years in charge. The Champions League win in 2006 is testament to that. They were truly back on top of the world. However, not many people within felt this was sustainable. The wage bill never truly went down to acceptable levels. Certain board members felt that this approach was too aggressive and that he was neglecting the club's, say it with me now, traditional values. The internal conflict culminated in several high-profile resignations from the board. In 2005, key members, including Vice President Sandro Rosell and Josep Bartomeu, resigned due to disagreements with Laporta's leadership style and strategic decisions. Rosell, in particular, once a prominent member of Laporta's board, was a massive critic of him. Others accused Laporta of being too autocratic and not consulting with the board on key decisions. Another damning piece of information that went against Laporta was that it came out that his brother-in-law, Alejandro Echeverria, who also happened to be a director at Barcelona, was part of a group of Francisco Franco's sympathizers. This, of course, led to his resignation from his role at Barcelona in 2005. In the 07-08 season, Barca finished third in La Liga, 18 points behind the champions Real Madrid, and lost to Man United in the Champions League semi-final. The disappointment of the season, coupled with the growing internal conflict of the club, led to a vote of no confidence taking place on July 8. In order for the vote to force Laporta out, a 2/3 majority was required, 66%. The final result? 61%. 61% of the 39,000 votes cast wanted him gone. Trouble. Laporta's decision to stay on as president and not resign after the vote of confidence led to further internal division, but also spurred him to refocus the club's efforts, and they should maybe be grateful for that, because he responded by doubling down on his vision for the club and probably making the best decision of his life, appointing Pep Guardiola as head coach in 2008. We all know how that went. By 2009, after a treble-winning season and truly becoming the golden standard of modern football, Laporta had silenced his enemies. Instead, what we were looking at here was arguably the best Barcelona president in history, a stark contrast to even a year before that. Under his guidance, Barcelona's revenue skyrocketed from 123 million to 400 million in 8 years. There was initial doubt, but the man did his job. However, whether he liked it or not, it was time to say goodbye. According to FC Barcelona statutes, the president can only serve a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. By 2010, he had done so. Sandro Rosell, who had served as Laporta's vice president before resigning in 2005 and who, if you remember, was one of his biggest critics, positioned himself as the main challenger in the 2010 presidential elections, another prominent businessman and sports marketing executive. Rosell campaigned on a platform of more financial responsibility, transparency, and a return to traditional values. Never heard that before. But I guess that explains why he signed on the club's first ever shirt sponsor, the Qatar Foundation, a significant departure from the club's tradition of not having a commercial sponsor on its shirts. Before this, the only thing Barca promoted on their shirts was a partnership with UNICEF, without receiving payment. All jokes aside, being pragmatic, this may have been the right move. Upon taking office, Rosell claimed that the club was in a more precarious financial situation than previously disclosed by Laporta's administration, and this was a €30 million per year boost. All the same, the controversy seemed almost never ending with him. Here are the highlights. He oversaw the transfer of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, which ended in a high-profile dispute with the player and significant financial losses for the club. Sporting director Chiki Begiristain departed, the sporting director that orchestrated Barcelona's most successful period and is currently doing the same for Manchester City. Neymar signed for the club in 2013, which was a great acquisition, but it's since been revealed that this was done under precarious circumstances. Neymar's dad was promised several bonuses of sorts, financial irregularities, undisclosed payments, and mismanagement of funds. This scandal led to several legal investigations. Just about all of them, to be fair, appear to have been dropped though. However, we only found out about that years later. Flashback to 2014, facing mounting pressure, Rosell resigned from his position as president. Barcelona were still winning, of course. However, they appeared far less unstoppable than they once did. Real Madrid again took center stage, as did Bayern Munich and Chelsea on a continental level. The 2011-12 season was arguably the best in the history of La Liga from a footballing perspective, but it was also one of the most toxic from an internal perspective. Real Madrid came out on top, and Barcelona were left with nothing but battle scars after a 91-point season. It was enough to cause Guardiola to call it quits. Rosell's resignation in 2014 marked an abrupt end to his presidency, which had started with high hopes and a promise of transparency. Now, more than ever, questions regarding the transparency and governance of FC Barcelona were rife. If one former vice president didn't work, why not try another? Following Rosell's resignation, his vice president, Josep Maria Bartomeu, took over. Remember, the Hydra, an entrepreneur and current CEO of Adulte Group, a company that primarily designs airport passenger boarding bridges. Okay, let's continue. Looking back on Bartomeu's tenure is like revisiting a fever dream. Coming into office, I don't think any president could ask for a better start. The 14-15 season, under the management of Luis Enrique, the team won the treble, their second in only 6 years. You could argue that this victory actually belonged to Sandro Rosell, but because he was gone and disgraced, Bartomeu was bathed in glory. Following on from that, they continued to dominate Spanish football for years to come. Real Madrid were taking home the Champions League trophy every year, and there was frustration there, but Barcelona were thriving nonetheless. Lionel Messi, Neymar, and Luis Suarez. Financially, Bartomeu oversaw significant commercial growth for FC Barcelona. One of his key achievements was securing a long-term sponsorship deal with Rakuten, which became the club's main shirt sponsor, replacing Qatar Airways. This bumped that revenue stream up to 55 million per year. He also launched the Espai Barça project, a major redevelopment plan for the Camp Nou and the surrounding area. The project aimed to modernize the stadium and improve the club's facilities, with the focus of enhancing the fan experience and increasing matchday revenue. Between the sporting performance and the improved deals that he was able to sign on the back of them, he bought himself a second term. That was the good. Here comes the bad. The Neymar transfer scandal that had led to Rosell's resignation continued to haunt Bartomeu. Bartomeu himself was implicated in the scandal and faced legal challenges, including charges of tax fraud. Not only that, but Neymar was bought by PSG in 2017. To be fair, it did seem as though Barcelona did everything they could to stop this from happening. Nonetheless, the man that was seen as Messi's heir was now gone, and the problems spiraled from then on. Debt rose significantly. The club's wage bill, which was amongst the highest in the world by 2017, became increasingly unstable. Roughly 420 million euros versus 350 for second-place Real Madrid. The Neymar sale gifted Barcelona 230 million euros, which isn't too bad, but they blew their entire load on Philippe Coutinho, Ousmane Dembele and later Antoine Griezmann, none of whom ever stood out for Barcelona due to injury, bad stylistic fit, or who knows at this point. Philippe Coutinho signs for Liverpool for 120 million in 2017, sold to Aston Villa for 20 million in 2022 after playing 76 league games for them in 5 years. Ousmane Dembele signed from Borussia Dortmund for 105 million in 2017. To be fair, good when he was fit, but that was rare. Sold to PSG in 2023 for 50 million. Griezmann signed from Atletico Madrid for 120 million in 2019. Sold for 20 million in 2022. Back to Atletico, basically the greatest loan deal of all time. They were handed several humiliating exits from the Champions League, including the infamous 4-0 to Liverpool in 2019 and the 8-2 thrashing by Bayern Munich in 2020. There was a complete disconnect with Lionel Messi. Messi felt that Bartomeu had consistently broken promises made to him regarding the club's direction and management. These included promises about player signings, the team's competitive level, and the overall strategy to keep Barcelona at the top of world football. Then, in 2020, things got even worse. The scandal centered around the hiring of third-party company called i3 Ventures by FC Barcelona. It was alleged that i3 Ventures was paid by the club to manage a series of social media accounts and websites that posted negative content about individuals within the Barcelona community who were critical of Bartomeu. This included current players like Lionel Messi and Gerard Piqué, former players like Xavi Hernandez and Pep Guardiola, and even other club officials. The purpose of these accounts was to protect Bartomeu's image and discredit those who opposed him by spreading derogatory content. The posts often targeted the personal and professional relationships of these figures, attempting to turn public opinion against them. The situation with Messi got even worse. Messi sent a burofax in the summer of 2020 to the club stating his intention to leave. He believed that a clause in his contract allowed him to leave for free at the end of the 2019-20 season. However, Bartomeu and the club contested this, arguing that the clause had expired and any interested clubs would need to pay Messi's €700 million release clause. This was not ever going to happen. This did irreversible damage. In late 2020, the combination of financial troubles, on-pitch failures, and internal scandals led to mounting pressure on Bartomeu. A motion of no confidence against his leadership was initiated by a group of club members. With the vote looming and facing overwhelming opposition, Bartomeu chose to resign in October 2020, along with the entire board of directors, rather than face what was certainly going to be an embarrassing ejection. And even after stepping out of the public eye, his demons continued to haunt him. In March 2021, Spanish police raided FC Barcelona's offices as part of an investigation into the Barçagate scandal. Bartomeu, along with other former executives, were arrested as part of the probe. After all this, the nonsense inside the club and Bartomeu's poor management, Barca were now experiencing a whole new low. After months of confusion and discomfort, Barcelona seemed to be slowly crumbling away thanks to previous leadership, a global virus, and much, much more. What they needed was a sure win, a move that would simply crush. He's back! In March 2021, Joan Laporta won the FC Barcelona presidential election. Laporta's campaign capitalized on his legacy of success during his first tenure, promising to restore the club's fortunes. He won the election with a significant majority. Upon taking office, Laporta was confronted with the full scale of Barcelona's financial crisis. It was bad. The club was burdened with over €1 billion in debt and a wage bill accounting for more than 100% of its income, far exceeding La Liga's financial regulations. It was so bad that Barcelona failed to register new players under La Liga's salary cap restrictions, which led to the most heartbreaking event in Barcelona history: the departure of Lionel Messi. With his contract coming to an end, it was either time to renew or let go. And as we all know, he was let go. There have been lots of rumors and reports regarding what actually happened here, behind closed doors. Some state that Messi was willing to play for significantly less, even for free, but that wasn't viable due to his status and regulatory reasons. Some state that it was in fact part of Barcelona's plan for succession in a new era. Some say it was the work of Florentino Perez in his ultimate quest for world domination. Nobody has said that last one, by the way. Whatever the actual specific reason is, we have strong reason to believe that it was financial, because reports indicate that they are still paying Messi's deferred wages from COVID times, the best player to ever play, while still arguably being the best player on the planet, left the club for absolutely nothing. Just imagine how the fans felt. And what made this even more troublesome for the club is that reports suggest that many of Barcelona's long-term sponsorship contracts were dependent on Messi being involved in their marketing campaigns. Not good. Like he had to do almost 20 years before, Laporta initiated a comprehensive audit of the club's finances to assess the full extent of the damage. He restructured the club's debt, securing new lines of credit and refinancing existing debt to prevent the club from going bankrupt. This included extending payment deadlines and pleading to reduce interest rates. COVID really crippled the club. Barcelona's matchday revenue contributed to around 150 million euros annually before the pandemic, so this was a major blow. Like in 2003, he had to negotiate with several high-earning players to reduce their salaries, extending the contracts of several senior players while deferring portions of their salaries to a later date was a neat trick that he didn't have to do before. After realizing how bad it was for Barcelona, his reputation was hindered when he pushed for the European Super League. He argued that it was necessary for their survival. The world, however, wouldn't let it happen. So he needed another way to fix the billion-euro debt. This included the famous financial levers, selling off current assets and future revenues from other assets to inject cash into the club, reduce debt, and allow for the registrations of new players. There are actually so many levers that they've had to pull to fund their future endeavors that I don't think I'll be able to talk about all of them. You've probably all seen them offering coaching classes of some kind on your Instagram or Facebook feeds. You've heard about them playing overseas matches in the US during league seasons. I'm assuming Barca are probably going to make a couple trips to Saudi or Qatar in the near future. So all I'm going to do here is name the large, substantial levers that they had to pull early on. Barcelona sold 10% of their La Liga television rights for the next 25 years to the American investment firm 6th Street for approximately 207.5 million. Later, in the same month, an additional 15% of the TV rights was sold to the same firm, bringing in another 300 million. Barcelona sold a 25% stake in Barca Studios, the club's digital content creation arm, to Socios.com for 100 million euros. In August 2022, they sold another 25% stake to Orpheus Media for an additional 100 million euros. This wasn't a lever, but is definitely worth mentioning. In March of 2022, Barcelona announced a landmark sponsorship deal with Spotify, which included the rights to the front of the men's and women's t-shirts and the renaming of the Camp Nou to the Spotify Camp Nou. The deal with Spotify is believed to be critical. 70 million per year over 4 years. It's one of the largest in the club's history. But moving along and focusing on the levers, these solutions have drawn major criticism. Short-term relief that could lead to long-term pain. Again, in spite of all of this, Barcelona have maintained a remarkably high level. Xavi was appointed as head coach in late 2021 and ended up winning the league in 22-23. Barcelona's core values of promoting young talent from La Masia have been exemplary. This is their foundation. Some of their movements are still somewhat questionable. High-profile players like Robert Lewandowski, Ferran Torres, Jules Koundé, Dani Olmo, and Rafinha still draw criticism, despite many of them contributing to the 22-23 win. There is still chaos regarding dips in form, a less-than-ideal 23-24 season, and perhaps an over-reliance on the young players who keep getting injured. But I feel like these factors on the pitch come with running a club of this size. It's up to the leadership to make sure the entire project remains intact. Where do Barcelona stand now? Well, they're roundabout in the same position that they were in at the beginning of Laporta's second tenure, but listen, 2 or 3 days after you watch this video, you know this club fluctuates, so things could be different. I very much doubt we've heard the last of the Levers, but they are still winning games, and I think they'll continue to do so. And perhaps we aren't giving them enough credit. In a few years, perhaps things will look entirely different. Take the new Camp Nou, for example, a 104-seater stadium that they believe will generate at least 350 million euros per year in matchday revenue, concerts, private functions, and more. The business case that this is most similar to is that of their good friends over in Madrid. With the rise of their youth, Barcelona won't need to spend hundreds of millions on entirely new squads. However, we can never be sure that history won't repeat itself once again in the near future. That is, if this team becomes successful and returns to the top consistently, that the leadership won't get complacent and squander their chances to build fail-safes. Barcelona has pretty much been run by the same group of people over the past 24 years. As I said in the intro, at least one of Laporta, Rosell, and Bartomeu have been either president or vice president. Like in politics, you can't tell me that all those around them in the board differ from these three in ideology. And for that exact reason, some feel it's finally time for change. With all the uncertainty about the future of the club, there has been a new development. An opposition group led by Joan Gaspart, managing director and partner of the Boston Consulting Group, Spanish and Portuguese division. He is the great-grandson of Agustí Montal and the grandson of Agustí Montal II, both of whom are former Barcelona presidents, the latter of which is credited with promoting the slogan Mes Que Un Club in the 70s, the former of which was the president who fought for the construction permits to build the original Camp Nou in 1950. One of the main themes of this video and Barcelona's troubles has been historical tradition. With this family, it's there. The group as a whole includes young individuals at the top of their respective professional industries that think the club needs a complete refresh from Laporta, Rosell, and Bartomeu. They aim to raise awareness and unite fans to push for change on an institutional level. Because we live in such turbulent times, as well as the fact that Barcelona are always just a couple of games away from turning a corner, they recognize that a vote of no confidence may not be viable at the moment, although I doubt they will be going anywhere anytime soon. All in all, Barcelona's history of financial mismanagement is something that each president has had to deal with, even be responsible for to some extent, since the 1930s. For all of the good that it seems that he's done since coming back into office, it's impossible to know how well Laporta's strategy in pulling all these levers is going to work out for Barcelona in the long term. Will all of these decisions cripple the club? Or are we about to witness a new dynasty, like we did the first time this man came around? Who knows? And there we have it. Let me know what you guys think about the longest video that's ever been posted on this channel. Thumbs up, we got a lot more coming. That's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.